So greetings on behalf of the Illinois Small Business Development Center at Chinese Mutual Aid Association. Thank you so much for joining us today. Just a few reminders that this webinar is being recorded for training purposes, and we will send out at a later time. Also, if you have questions, so please submit your questions in the chat box below. And then also on the screen at the Illinois SBDC at CMAA, we provide one-on-one business advising and resources at no cost. So if you need individual assistance, please sign up with the eCenter link at CMA as shown on the slide deck to schedule an appointment. Now to kick things off, I'd like to thank our community partners, the Uptown Chamber of Commerce and CMA's distinguished board members for their support. First, I'd like to bring up International Bank of Chicago. This lender is a minority depository institution that was given early access to the first draws of PPP. To talk about their role in community banking and lending is their Vice President Loan Officer and CMA's very own prominent, brilliant, and talented board member, Laura Lee. Laura, I'd like to pass the mic over to you.
Thank you, Tommy. That was very kind words that you just spoke of me. I don't think I characterize as those, but thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Laura Lee, loan officer at International Bank of Chicago and a board member of the Chinese Mutual Aid Association. On behalf of International Bank of Chicago and CMAA's board of directors, I would like to extend our special gratitude to SBA Illinois District Office and Director Bo Steiner, and to our esteemed CMAA board president and vice president of the First Midwest Bank, Mike Chin, for joining us today. International Bank of Chicago is a certified community development financial institution and minority depository institution with 5 locations in the Chicagoland area. For the last 3 decades, we are committed to delivering responsible, affordable financing to individuals and small businesses that make positive economic and social impacts in their communities we serve. We have loan officers who are bilingual, speaking different languages such as Spanish, various Asian dialects, Mandarin, Cantonese, Korean, and Hindu, just to name a few. At International Bank, we have been working closely with our community's minority-owned businesses with their PPP loans during these very challenging and difficult times. So far, we've processed 1,700 in loans totaling over 90 million. Of those, we have helped 1,100 different businesses with 77% under 50,000 and 95% to minority businesses. As a frontline lender, I just want to give a brief overview in navigating through the application process quickly. If you've received first draw funds last year, haven't applied for the second draw, you should contact your lender immediately. One of the key eligibility requirement is your business will have to show a 25% reduction in revenue for at least 1 quarter in 2020 as compared to the same period in 2019. Let's say you pick quarter 2 in 2020 as a quarter. You have to compare the revenues that you did in Q2 in 2019. It has to show a 25% drop. I recommend gathering your gross receipts and payroll files. Many of our clients consult with their accountants and payroll services. Some of the acceptable documentation on bank statements or in our P&L statements from QuickBooks or accountants prepare. For loans under 150,000, you don't need to provide supporting documents at the time of application, but you do have to submit it before applying for forgiveness. I do tell the applicants to review the information and support at the time of the application to ensure you meet the eligibility. If you didn't apply for PPP funds in the first round, you do have the opportunity to apply at this time. There is a different application for the first time PPP applicants. Make sure you use the right form. I've had applicants filling out the applications for the second draw form, and they have to redo the application all over again. For the first time PPP applicant, you do not have to show the 25% drop in business sales. Some of the common errors I come across on the application are missing 6-digit NAICS code, which is a new field on the application. You can find this code on your tax return, or you can search it on www.naics.com website. Just type in the keyword, it will pop up with several NAICS codes. You can pick one that best describe your business. Another common missing field is the first draw SBA loan number. It is a 10-digit loan number uniquely provided by the SBA. We have applicants who apply for their first, second draw with a bank, but the first draw was with a different bank, and they need to find and put that SBA loan number on the application. Even though the amount is not on the application, it's helpful to have the amount next to the loan number. And don't forget to initial questions 4 and 5. These questions are related to felony and fraud. It's to the side and people miss it. For self-employed independent contractors, you still need to list the number of employees as 1, not 0. You as a self-employed independent contractor count as an employee. As far as the documentation, we get questions from many applicants on what we need to verify, the payroll cost. For corporations, get quarterly 941, 940, or W-3. For this time around, you may choose either 2019 or 2020 if you have them completed. For sole proprietors, independent contractors, you should provide the Schedule C from your personal tax return. Also, just a note that the maximum amount in annual compensation is $100,000 for each employee. You can include in the monthly payroll figure. The key is working with your banker, your accountant, and your payroll service for assistance. Reach out to the Chinese Mutual Aid Association as a resource. Just remember, we are here to support you and help you through these difficult times. Together, we will guide you through the application process successfully and assist you in any way we can. Thank you for joining us today. Thanks to Tommy Choi for coordinating this event and leading the SBDC program here at CMAA. I'll turn it back over to you, Tommy. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Laura, for joining us today. Really appreciate it. And thank you so much to International Bank of Chicago for your support. Now, another lender's perspective we'll be hearing from is from First Midwest Bank. They were recently recognized nationally as a top 10 lender for SBA funding. And to talk more about First Midwest Bank, I'd like to welcome their VP of Business Banking and Crane Chicago's most notable minorities and commercial banking, CMA's very own esteemed board president, Mike Chin.
Thank you, Tommy, for the kind introduction. As you mentioned, at First Midwest, we are accepting PPP applications from non-First Midwest clients. And also during the first draw of PPP applications, First Midwest did provide approximately 6,000 plus small businesses, about 1.2 billion of much needed funds via the PPP program. With the second draw application, as you just mentioned, we are quite busy with assisting over 2,700 businesses thus far with approximately 360 million in fundings. And then we definitely appreciate both Steiner and the SBA expediting both the application and the forgiveness application process for requests of 150,000 and less, since this segment makes up a majority of the PPP requests. And so definitely look forward to Bo and his feedback, and thank you again, Tommy and the CMA SBDC for letting First Midwest participate in today's session.
Thanks so much, Mike. And what's really nice about this round from the last round is that First Midwest Bank is accepting non-First Midwest Bank customers. Is that still the case?
That is the case.
Great. Here is the link for everyone in the chat box, and then we will also be sending out the recording, so you'll be getting the links to all these websites. Next, I'm very, very honored to introduce our distinguished SBA Illinois District Director, Bo Steiner. And we want to thank him and the entire Illinois team for their tireless work and efforts to help small businesses. We just can't say enough how grateful we are to Director Steiner and the Illinois team as they are working around the clock to help businesses push through this global pandemic. So we're going to hear the latest updates as of February 9th, 2021 from Director Bo Steiner, and then have a Q&A at the end. And with that, I'd like to welcome our District Director, Mr. Bo Steiner. Bo?
Thanks, Tommy. Really appreciate it. Can you hear me okay? Great. Awesome. So yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to be here, Tommy, of course. We value for sure the partnership with CMA around the SBDC, and know what a great resource you are for the community on the north side of Chicago there. So appreciate all you're doing to help small businesses and entrepreneurs navigate all of the things that are going on right now. We can go to the next slide, if that's all right. So really wanted to talk a little bit about where we are with the programs after the most recent stimulus package at the end of December, what those funding opportunities are for you as a small business owner, a sole proprietor, or a nonprofit. We'll get into some of the specific details around the Paycheck Protection Program and the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. And we'll also want to talk about some of the grants that are available as part of this stimulus package and clarify some of the requirements around those. We'll also share some additional assistance and resources that maybe you can go to as you look to, I guess, navigate these programs. So let's go to the next slide. So as many of you are aware, in April, or it was really in March of 2020, Congress passed the CARES Act and subsequently a couple of additional laws to amend and update programs around support for small businesses, chief among them the Paycheck Protection Program, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, Emergency Advance Program. But more recently, at the end of December, a new stimulus package was launched, which provided additional funding around PPP, extended the availability to apply for that program, while also extending some of the other programs and adding new programs to our arsenal of economic assistance programs that we can bring to the table. So we're very much in the early part of many of these programs, but we do want to continue to educate all of you on what is going on, some of the changes that have occurred over time and how they will impact you as you move forward. So let's go ahead to the next slide. So this again covers kind of the scope of what we have available right now, and we'll talk more about the Paycheck Protection Program, debt relief, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, and the Shuttered Venue Operators grants. But first, we'll go to the next slide. We'll first focus on the Paycheck Protection Program, and I always like to start these conversations with just a quick overview on what PPP, as we call it, is. Paycheck Protection Program is a loan program where you apply for and receive the loan from a private sector lender. That could be a commercial lender, it could be a nonprofit lender like a community development financial institution, it could be a credit union. It kind of runs the gamut of lenders that are available to provide this program. And that includes, just a wide range of lenders that are eligible to provide this program. The SBA guarantees these loans, and if the loan is used in accordance with the guidelines around the program, then that loan can be up to 100% forgiven, meaning that the federal government pays off that loan on your behalf with the lender. So it's a really effective way to get funds in the hands of the small businesses, the entrepreneurs, the nonprofits, and you're working with those lenders, the banks, et cetera, that you're used to working with on a day in, day out basis. So that's that's the high level overview. Now, there have been some kind of changes in the program based on the Economic Aid Act at the end of 2020, including expanding PPP eligibility to additional types of entities, including 501c6s, increased eligible use of proceeds. So you can use these funds in more ways than were originally in place as part of the CARES Act. It changes the way we look at the covered period within which you have to expend those funds. So when we talk about the covered period, that begins when your loan is dispersed, and then between 8 and 24 weeks is that covered period within which you have to expend those funds in accordance with the program guidelines. I'll talk about that more in a minute. It also affords the opportunity to secure a second PPP loan. So let's say you received a Paycheck Protection Program loan in 2020, you expended all the funds, used it on eligible uses. You may now be eligible for another loan to continue to help you to weather until we can get back into more normal conditions. Congress also changed that the deduction of expenses covered with a forgiven PPP loan can be used. It allows for deduction of those expenses for the purposes of your taxes. There's the simplified forgiveness form, which was mentioned earlier. Thank you, Michael and Laura. And the other big thing is we aren't subtracting the EIDL advance there was from the PPP loan forgiveness amount. So if you recall, as part of the CARES Act, there were emergency EIDL advances, which were up to $10,000 to help mitigate some of the working capital losses in short order. Well, originally those were required to be reduced from your forgiveness amount. That is no longer the case. In fact, we just issued a guidance for lenders and for internally for the agency that allow for us to go ahead and for those folks that have received forgiveness for their loan and did receive some kind of reduction due to their EIDL advance, there's a mechanism now in place to go ahead and issue additional funds to pay for the amount of that EIDL advance that was reduced and any associated interest. So good news there. All of these are to the benefit of that borrower. So that's a really, really good thing for all of you who maybe are participating in the program right now. Next slide. So let's go ahead and talk about what a first draw loan is versus a second draw. First draw is if you did not receive a PPP loan in 2020. Now, the same rules that applied if you would have applied in 2020, apply here as enacted in the CARES Act, including you can have up to 500 or fewer employees. You, instead of having to demonstrate with, financial statements or other kind of documentation, you simply certify that you require this loan due to the economic uncertainty and to support ongoing operations of the business. So similar rules that were in place for that, the initial CARES Act launched PPP program. You can take advantage of the expanded eligible expenses, which include things like operations expenses, employee protection expenses, disaster expenses that were not covered by other reimbursement, even some supply expenses. So it just gives you more latitude to use the funds in accordance with the program. I do want to remind you though, you still need to meet that 60% benchmark. At least 60% of the funds need to be used on payroll costs. I already mentioned you as the borrower now can elect any period between 8 and 24 weeks. Originally it was 8 or 24 weeks. Now it's anywhere in between that. So that gives you more flexibility for when you determine your covered period, and then should allow you to take advantage of some of the safe harbors that are part of the forgiveness process as well. Note that certain borrowers may request an increase into their original PPP loan amount. These are limited cases. For example, SBA changed the way that the guidance that we provided for calculating loan amounts for partnerships, for farmers and ranchers. If you fit into one of those two categories and you would have been eligible for more based on the new criteria, you may request an increase to your loan amount. Other examples include if you received a PPP loan, but you didn't take the full amount, you took some number less than the full amount you could have received, or you received a PPP and you returned it in its entirety. Again, these are instances where you may have the opportunity to increase your original first draw loan. Key here is you work with your lender that you worked with to originate that loan in the first place. You work with them, then they file the appropriate paperwork. They go through the appropriate process to gain approval for that increased amount. Another element that's important for both first draw and second draw is you have to have been in business as of February 15th of 2020. And you must apply on or before March 31st, 2021, or until the appropriations are exhausted. So that's a first draw PPP loan. Again, if you hadn't received one in 2020, you are eligible to apply for a first draw now. Next slide. I mentioned the increased eligibility. You can see the newly eligible, but still eligible are all the sole proprietors, independent contractors, self-employed, business entities, 501c3, 501c19s, and tribal businesses. So we still have that broad landscape of entities that are eligible. We just added, Congress just added some more who can take advantage of the program now. Next slide. Now let's kind of shift gears to second draw loans. This is for borrowers that previously received a PPP loan, used all the funds on eligible expenses, have 300 employees or less, and can demonstrate that they've experienced a 25% reduction in revenues in at least one quarter in 2020 versus the comparable quarter in 2019. Okay, so those are kind of the core eligibility criteria. Now, for most borrowers, the maximum loan amount of a second draw PPP loan is calculated very similar to how you calculated your first draw. It's 2.5 times your average monthly payroll. However, now you may use either 2019 or 2020 payroll costs. Remember that the max loan amount for second draw is $2 million compared to $10 million for a first draw PPP. Now, there is a caveat for second draw where borrowers in the accommodations and food services sector, which begins in Industry Code 72, may be able to apply for up to 3.5 times their average monthly payroll. And you heard one of the things that was a common issue was related to putting your NAICS code in properly in your application. That's going to be really important as part of that process if you are part of the accommodations and food services sector. Generally speaking, what I've seen for, kind of what your official NAICS code would be what you use on your tax returns when you file. So whatever kind of tax documents, whether it's your corporate tax documents or your Schedule C, whatever the case may be, that's where you're going to look to see what your kind of official industry code is. The second draw PPP loan applications use a different application form. It's the SBA form 2483 SD. However, as with first draw, your lender may use their own kind of process. So it may not be a paper form, it may not be a PDF. It might be you go online and fill out your application. So just know that even if that's the case, they'll still be asking for the same information that we would ask for on paper documentation. Next slide. As I mentioned, the criteria, I'm not going to go over these again, but kind of the key elements are having that first draw, using the amounts only for eligible expenses, and have expended it all before that second PPP loan can be dispersed. Can't have more than 300 employees, and demonstrating that 25% reduction in gross receipts. As far as that 25% reduction in gross receipts between the quarter, a quarter in 2019 versus 2020, just know that as far as the application goes, if your loan is $150,000 or less, you are not required to provide that evidence up front during the application process. However, on the back end, when you apply for forgiveness, you will have to provide that information. Last thing I'll touch on second draw is just, you don't have to use the same lender that you use for second draw as you use for first draw. That's not a requirement, but you will have to have all of your information from that first draw loan to provide as part of the application for second draw if you go to a different lender. All right, next slide. So really love this slide, just kind of talks through like step by step what you need to do. But number one is finding your lender. That's either the lender that you already work with, or if you're having trouble finding a lender, you can talk to Tommy or your local Chamber of Commerce. I'm sure that they work with many lenders who may be participating in the program. Or you can always come to SBA at SBA.gov/lender match, which is also another tool which can connect you with participating lenders that you may be able to work with. In addition, you're gonna go and complete the application and include all of your supporting documentation. So if you're an S corp and you have employees, that includes your payroll documentation, like your IRS form 941s, your W-2s, that sort of thing, to support your application. But you also have to show some documentation with providing evidence that you were in business around February 15th. So those are some of the expectations that should be set up front. Work very closely with your lender to understand exactly what they need in order to move your application forward. And then once the lender compiles everything, they feel like they've got a complete package, then they'll submit the information to SBA and we will review it and approve. Understand, for, in particular, second draw loans, there are some additional checks that SBA is doing. So it's not an overnight thing that we get the application, it's approved automatically. There is going to be a time lag in there as we validate your business's information against some other records that we're maintaining in other databases that we work with to make sure that you're an eligible borrower. So just be aware that that's the case. And there are instances where you may need to go back to your lender and provide additional information based on what they're getting back from SBA to validate some of the information that may be of concern. So it should be a relatively seamless process, but again, we're working very closely with the lending community to try and make it as seamless as possible. I finally want to just reiterate that March 31st, 2021 is the deadline for application, but if you're interested, sooner is always better because it's March 31st or when the appropriation is exhausted, which could happen prior to the end of this calendar quarter. All right, next slide. A couple things on the terms and maturity. If the loan's not 100% forgiven, it's a 5-year term, 1% interest. Again, that's going to be any balance that's not fully forgiven. Know that you don't have to start making principal and interest payments until 10 months after the end of your covered period. And so those are some of the key criteria on the front of the terms and maturity. So next slide. As far as forgiveness process, when you're on the back end, many of you who took first draw loans are already in that process. We do have the simplified application for forgiveness for loans $150,000 or less. But what you do is you pull together the required documentation to support your application for forgiveness, including the application itself. You submit to your lender, they review it, make sure they feel like they've got everything they need, then they'll send it to SBA, at which point we'll review and make a final decision. Lender has 60 days, SBA has another 90 days, so it could be some time before that loan is actually forgiven finally. And then once that forgiveness decision is made, SBA remits that payment to the lender to apply both the forgiven principal and accrued interest to that loan. All right, next slide. So next, just touching on the economic injury disaster loan program. So this is our normal disaster loan program. Economic Aid Act extended the deadline to December 31st, 2021. This is a direct loan program, so you apply directly with SBA. We review it, and it's a working capital loan, long-term, low interest rates. So 2.75% for nonprofits, 3.75% for businesses, up to 30 years fixed. And so it's a really great tool if you have those working capital needs that you're struggling to meet. Now, the application process is fairly streamlined. However, we will potentially ask for additional documentation through that process to validate certain things like tax returns and IRS 4506T, tax transcript requests, those sorts of things. Again, eligibility is very similar to what eligibility was for the PPP. There are some differences, but generally speaking, businesses that are 500 employees or fewer, as well as most nonprofits are eligible for the program. I will touch on this real quick. You can only receive one economic injury disaster loan. However, if you've received what we call an EIDL, you may request reconsideration to increase that loan amount. We do have a FAQ on our website that provides you with the step-by-step on who you need to send the information to, what that request needs to entail, so that then they can go and review it and determine whether you will be eligible for additional funds through that program. But just be aware that you can potentially request additional funding, but you can't apply for a second EIDL. Next slide. One of the new programs from, now we're moving into the grant side of the house of what we've got to support small businesses, nonprofits. First is the Targeted EIDL Advance. So this is a different program than the emergency EIDL advances that we issued as part of the CARES Act originally. Congress appropriated $20 billion for this program, and it's a targeted advance, but recipients must meet certain eligibility criteria. First off, be located in a low-income community. Second, have suffered greater than 30% economic loss during one 8-week period in 2020 versus a similar 8-week period in 2019, and have 300 or fewer employees. The primary focus of the program right now is contacting those entities, so that's businesses, sole proprietors, nonprofits, who applied for and received a grant of less than $10,000 in 2020. So they received an emergency EIDL advance of less than $10,000. We'll invite those entities to apply for the targeted EIDL advance. We'll validate their information that they are indeed located in a low-income community and meet those revenue loss criteria. And if they meet all of the program requirements, then they'll be eligible for an additional grant up to a total of $10,000 between the emergency EIDL they received in 2020 and the targeted EIDL advance. So that's kind of the first cohort that we're going to look at right now. Second cohort is going to be those entities that applied for but did not receive an EIDL advance because the funds for the program were exhausted. Again, we will invite those entities to apply, and at that point we'll validate their eligibility per the program guidance. Those entities would be eligible for up to the full $10,000 should they meet all the eligibility requirements and there are still funds available for the program. So I'll leave you with, on this program, there is no application process. You cannot newly apply for the program. We've got millions of applicants who have already applied for it, and then we'll be working through that backlog first in order to determine how many of those entities are eligible to receive these grants. Should there be additional appropriation left over, then that may be another situation, but for now, that's where we're focused on this program. Next slide. Here's some of the information if you are invited to apply that you may need to provide. So just be aware of, having your 2019 federal tax returns available. You should use the same employer ID number or social security number that you used in your original application. You will have to prove that gross receipts reduction of 30% or more. You confirm some information. You may need to be required to sign a 4506T to obtain tax transcripts before we can approve the targeted idle advance. A couple things that on this program that I'm going to reiterate are just, when you're going through this process, be really diligent about attention to detail. Make sure that when you look at your banking information, that it's a bank account that's open, that you have the routing number correct, that you've got the account number correct, the bank name, the name of the entity or whatever that's on the bank account itself. There's not a way, if you don't get this right the first time, there's not a reconsideration process for this. So it's really important that you are attentive to detail as you go through this application. So take your time, get it right. Kind of like they say in I think the construction business, measure twice, cut once. So make sure you measure twice and cut once on this one to make sure you get it right the first time. Next slide. All right. I think that I've pretty much covered all of this stuff, so we can go on to the next slide. All right, the next one, this is another big program, $15 billion appropriated for the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant Program. This program is generally targeted towards live performance venues and operators and promoters, movie theaters, museum operators, and kind of talent representatives. There's kind of a broad scope of different types of really niche businesses that are eligible for the program, but they're able to receive grants of up to $10 million. So basically up to 45% of 2019 revenues would be kind of eligible, like an entity that's eligible would be eligible for 45% of their 2019 revenues. So it's a really great opportunity for these types of venues that had to really shut down to apply for and receive these grants. Had to have been in business or in operation as of February 29th, 2020. And you cannot have applied for or received a PPP loan on or after December 27th, 2020. Really important to know, the act of applying for the PPP disqualifies you from the SBO grant program. Next slide. We like to show this as kind of a compare and contrast about what might be eligible, use of proceeds, that sort of thing. I'm not going to go into it too much, but I think the most important message is, look, if you apply for PPP, you're ineligible for the SBOG unless you're declined for the PPP loan. If you apply for the SBOG, then you're not eligible to apply for PPP. So it's going to be a business decision for those entities that may be eligible to decide what would be best for them based on their individual circumstances. But just this is a pretty good tool to just look at, and this is on our website too, so you can find it there. Go ahead, next slide. Next, I'll touch on the SBA-backed loan debt relief. This is for borrowers who have SBA 7A, 504, and microloans, where generally speaking, this is where SBA will provide principal and interest payments on behalf of the borrower for some period of time, depending on the program. For 7A, generally speaking, it's up to 3 months of payments for all borrowers who have 7A loans that are current, in good standing, with the potential for an up to additional 5 months for those industries that are most impacted. So really great opportunity for those businesses that have those loans to get a little breathing room on their working capital because they won't have to make these loan payments. you don't have to apply for debt relief. SBAs can provide it automatically. So we work with the lenders to make sure that we know every loan that's in place through SBA programs and that we're making the payments appropriately. And we've already sent letters to eligible borrowers, so you should have that answer those questions as well. If you do have questions, again, because SBA runs our loan programs through delegated lenders, your relationship is with the lender. If you have issues, you need to work with them. And then if they need additional assistance, they can reach out to SBA for help. Next slide. All right, so we kind of covered the range of different programs that are available from the standpoint of, the funding piece. Paycheck Protection Program was funded at $284.5 billion. We're about $101 billion into that, $284.5 billion. Debt relief was funded at $3.3 billion. The Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program has really, I think, good reserves in that program. I don't know exactly where the funding levels are on that, but it's still available. Targeted idle is 20 billion, and then the shuttered venue operators grant is 15 billion. So I guess from a timing standpoint, PPP is currently in operation. If you're interested, now's the time to go after that. The targeted idle advance was launched last Monday. So we've already started reaching out to certain borrowers, but it's going to take time to get to the many, many borrowers that may be eligible for that. So just be patient on that front. If you want additional information, there's a whole FAQ on SBA's website, and you can find all this information at SBA.gov/coronavirus. The shuttered venue operators grant, similarly, is still a work in progress. So we do not have the application process announced officially at this point in time. We're still working through that. A couple things you can do on the SVO grant program ahead of time is register in the System for Award Management, which is also known as SAM.gov. And you can prepare, start pulling together all of your financial documentation to be able to demonstrate your revenue loss and other impacts that will likely be relevant to the SVO grant program application. Next slide. Always love to share available resources for you. We have business counseling and advising resources, of which CMAA hosts the Small Business Development Center. We also work with SCORE, which is an all-volunteer organization that provides mentoring to business owners and entrepreneurs. And we have 2 women's business centers run by the Women's Business Development Center, one in Chicago and one in Aurora, Illinois. If you are looking for a resource, you obviously have Tommy and the team at CMAA. But if you want to reach other organizations, you can always find them at sba.gov/local-assistance. We do have 2 offices in Illinois from an SBA standpoint, one in Chicago, one in Springfield. Next slide. And if you want to stay connected to what's going on with SBA, we've got a bunch of links up here. I'm not going to read all of them to you, but again, I would point you to the links at the bottom. That's going to be the latest and greatest information available on all of SBA's COVID response programs, and encourage you to stay tuned there, as well as sign up for our newsletter, because we push information out regularly in that channel as well. Next slide. All right. So that covers everything for me, Tommy. I'm more than happy to answer questions as folks may have them.
Thanks so much, Bo. Really appreciate the insightful updates. I know it's a lot of information. Bo, believe it or not, we do have a few folks that are starting the PPP application first draw. What is your general recommendation and advice for someone that is starting this process for the first time? What should they do before going to their lender?
Yeah, I mean, I think number one is go to your lender as soon as possible and find out what their process is for submitting those applications, whether it's an online tool that they're using or it's paper documents, whatever the case may be. Second would be to go to SBA's website at sba.gov/PPP and go to the first draw section. There you'll find the application. And I would encourage you to just read through that really carefully to understand what's required in that application, to, so that you understand kind of what you're signing up for as part of this program. I'd also recommend that you look at a document that's also on that First Draw website, which talks about how to calculate loan amounts for PPP First Draw loans. That document addresses probably 95% of the types of business entity you have, the way that you record, whether your revenues, whether it's, I'm a sole proprietor, I use a 1040 Schedule C, or I'm an S Corp, I pay myself, like all those different iterations. You can find one that you should be able to find one that applies to your particular business, and it walks you step by step how to calculate your loan amounts and what kind of documentation you need to provide and have in hand to support that application. So that's what I encourage right off the bat.
Thanks so much, Bill. And for folks that made mistakes in the past, what are some of the common mistakes you've seen on applications for the PPP and EIDL? What are some things that people can avoid that are applying for the first time?
Sure. So I think the first one is just, I'll segment them out. So the first one on the PPP side is just, again, understanding how you calculate your loan amount and making sure that you have the information available to you as part of that application. So, your lender is going to kind of walk you through it as well. But on that front, I'd say just know what you need to have in place. As far as the economic injury disaster loan program, a lot of the things that we saw that were issues were related to validation of the business. So as an example, having incorrect banking information, so electronic funds transfer information in place, not fully completing any forms that are required. So for example, on a 4506T, if we're asking for that, then you may need to sign it, because if it's not signed, then it doesn't count, right? So I think it's those kind of attention to detail things that you want to bear in mind as you're looking at applying to these different programs. So yeah, I'd say those are probably the biggest things, Tommy.
Great, thanks for that tip. And then looks like we have a question from the audience. What is the average lead time between submission and receipt of approval, then receipt of funds?
So it's gonna vary based on the situation. I mean, number one, it's you submit, is your package complete? In other words, did you provide all the supporting documentation that the lender requires as part of that application? I'm assuming, I don't know if we're talking about PPP or EIDL, but I'll talk about PPP first, right? So there's that. Once you have a full package, I don't know how long the lenders generally take. I think they're pretty efficient at processing these loan applications. And then when it comes to SBA, assuming there's no holds or other issues that are identified as part of the validation process, it's going to be 2 to 4 business days that'll take us to process that. Now, once a loan's approved, the lender has up to 10 days to disperse the loan. So there is a pretty tight time period within which they have to disperse as well. As far as the EIDL loan, I'm reluctant. I would not give a timeline on how long that process is going to take. I will tell you that if you really want to expedite it, though, is making sure that every little bit of information that you put in there is absolutely 100% correct. What we saw was just the biggest issue we saw was just loans, applicants did not put the right information in there, and then you get into this cycle of trying to correct it, which creates a lot of other challenges. So that would be the biggest thing I would say on that.
Thank you. And then last question, Bo. So believe it or not, we still have a few folks in the community that are still on the fence with this program, PPP EIDL. what is your final pitch to them to apply for this program?
Well, I mean, I think two things. One is, right, if if you need the funds and it's vital to the sustainability of your business and you being able to maintain your payroll and keep your employees on staff, then it's a great tool for that, right? It's an amazing resource, I think, from the standpoint of those businesses that use the funds appropriately are seeing a great deal of success in receiving forgiveness on those loans. So it's really a great way to sustain your business. Now, I guess on the other hand, it's like, look, if you don't need it to sustain your business operations, there are a lot of people that do. So, there is a limited pot, is what I always like to say. And so, we really need the businesses that have the greatest need are able to access this program. But I mean, look, it's been a lifesaver for many, many, many businesses. And if your business needs the assistance, there's no reason not to apply for this, because you will get needed help.
Yeah, CMA received a PPP loan, and we're just so thankful and grateful to have this lifeline. It's been so helpful to our organization and continue our work. So thanks so much. Looks like we have another question from the audience. If I just received my first PPP, can I get my second draw before March 31st, 2021?
So the key criteria on eligibility is that for a second draw is that you have to have received a PPP and used all of the funds on all the proceeds on eligible uses, right? So you would have to have expended all of those funds before you would be eligible to receive a second or have a second PPP dispersed. And so that's, I mean, I don't know if you've got a timing challenge there, I would say.
Great. Well, thank you so much, both the Illinois SBA team. We really appreciate all your work and efforts. I know it's been a tough time. You've been going at it since Christmas on this, so really appreciate it. And then thank you so much to our distinguished board members, Laura Lee of International Bank of Chicago, and then Mike Shin, our board president of First Midwest Bank. Thanks for all your support. And now please reach out to Chinese Mutual Aid Association if you need any further assistance. And with that, we'd like to wish you, your family, and loved ones a happy Lunar New Year. We'd like to wish you peace, happiness, prosperity, and good health in the year of the ox. And we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.